Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Duo recap. This is a recap of the Dalim user organization meeting we held last month in Las Vegas, and we're going to review some of the new and upcoming features that were discussed during that conference. Before we begin, a few notes on the GoToWebinar application itself. There is a zoom button in the upper left-hand corner of the main screen that you can use to either expand or shrink the image of my desktop if the screen is showing a little too large or small for you. There is also in the GoToWebinar control panel an area where you can enter questions if you have questions about anything that I'm discussing. If there's anything particularly relevant to a specific point I'm making as I'm making it, I may pause to address that question. Otherwise, I'll leave the Q&A till the end. This is part of our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar series, which we do the third Wednesday of each month. There is a listing online of all these events at blanchardsystems.com/events. Typically, as soon as we know what we're going to be doing for the next month's webinar, we push it up here and have some information on that ready for you. So without further ado, we'll kick this off with Twist. The Twist 8 release does now feature a native editor for both Mac OS and Windows, so you're no longer tethered to that old Java Web Start applet, which is still available if you want it. The new native editor is available and compatible with not just Twist 8 and ES5, but really anything that's ES 4.5 or Twist 7.5 and newer. It can detect what version of Twist you're using and make sure that it's going to be compatible. This will work with either regular standalone Twist or eTwist if you're using an ES installation. There are also, in some of the tools in Twist 8, some additional controls for managing files that were sent from ES. So for example, in the input files, there's an area where you can choose to split basically a set of files that were submitted from within ES. I think there's also an option in the fork tool now where you can fork based off a number of files that were sent from ES. As far as changes to tools, Image Action got a lot of new functionality and has support for a few new formats and also some conditional adjustments. So for example, you can now say if it's larger than this size, then scale the file. It also has support for PNG transparency and also for direct PDF input. So if you want to scale a PDF with Image Action, you no longer have to push it through an OTIFF or an OJPEG tool. You can just go directly into Image Action. PowerTrap now has support for custom luminance for spot colors. So if you want to make sure you're going to get a really good match for that spot color and make sure that it spreads or chokes appropriately, you have the option where you can set a custom luminance value for those in there. SendMail now has enhanced support for HTML messages. Most people tend to use SendMail for sending just plain text messages, but there is a little radio button in there you can check to say, I want to send this message as HTML, and then type in the HTML code that you want to use to comprise the message. This new release, Twist 8, does have enhanced support for that with, I think the features they mentioned it was a little better at was line breaks, putting tables in emails, and also embedding images from another external URL. In addition to those enhancements are also two new tools, the O3D tool and the OSVG tool. The OSVG tool is just for basically exporting scalable vector graphics files. The O3D tool is for exporting and converting 3D files. Since ES4, ES has had the ability to view and handle 3D files. Dalim did make a conscious decision to go with only collada files because those are kind of emerging as an industry standard. However, if you need to import another type of 3D file into ES, you can convert it either using this O3D tool or the similar tool that exists within ES. Conversely, if you need to pull those files out of ES and send them to another application in another format, you can use those to convert those collada files back into whatever format you need for your destination. I think there's about maybe 11 or 12 different formats it supports, including Blender, stereolithography, and things like that. And Dialog now supports in Dialog 5.1 closed-loop color with ES. This is supported by the Latitude Helper application, which will run on most recent versions of Mac OS or Windows, because ES doesn't have the same access to your file system as it did under Java. This is basically just a helper application, which it keeps track of when you open a file in Dialog. It keeps track of whatever monitor profile you're using. If necessary and it doesn't have it on the server, it'll upload a copy to the server so that's used to rasterize the files for screen display so that they'll match the color correctly on your monitor. This only verifies, it doesn't calibrate itself. So if you wanted to do calibration, you might use something like ISO's Color Navigator or whatever came with your calibration tool. And then you could just use this to verify. There's an option in the closed loop settings where you can have it only show a file if your monitor is within a specific tolerance. So it doesn't really deal with the ICC file creation, but it does allow you to check and make sure your monitor is within an acceptable tolerance. There will also be an upcoding barcode reader. There's a little icon up here you can click, and what you'll be able to do is select a barcode or some other kind of code in your document and click it. And if it can, what it'll do is it'll add both the contents and the barcode type into an annotation. This does support, I think there was a list of most standard barcode types, as well as some other kinds of codes like QR codes. So that's one way you can verify that your code is in the correct format and it has the correct contents right before you go to press. There will also be upcoming support for styled annotations within Dialog, so you can make different portions bold, italic, underlined. It's important to note Dalim did consciously decide to have this not support font or text color, so you can't necessarily make something neon green Comic Sans, but you can make it bold, italic, add emphasis to certain parts as needed. I believe they were also saying at Duo that this should be compatible with Acrobat. There is a feature that's existed in ES for a while where you can download a file with notes and it'll convert the Dialog annotations into Acrobat PDF comments. I think that's supposed to, wherever Acrobat's able to read it, it tries to preserve that formatting. Now moving on to ES. The real focus of ES during the presentations, it really seemed like a focus on interoperability. They're working to really make sure that ES is a good citizen in a world where you're really dealing with a lot of different applications and different content management systems. So at the forefront of that really is upcoming support for the Amazon S3 storage systems that you could have, for example, a file system that's stored on Amazon S3. As part of the Latitude Helper application that I mentioned back a few slides, you do also now have the ability to do version control again. There's a check-in, check-out feature that used to be done with Java, but you can use that. So you select a few files, go to File, Checkout, and have it push them to a folder on your local computer. From there, you can then check those back in when you're done, and it'll only upload as revisions the files that changed from what existed on ES. I think there was some talk at some point about possibly having that be a way you could have local hot folders on your computer, but I don't think that's really something that's really solidified yet. There was also discussion of integration with other creative applications or content management applications, such as InDesign and Photoshop, which are handled through the Silicon Connector plugin. Chili Publisher integration is built into ES5. That is an online document editing solution. And there's also been some discussion where there was a presentation on integrating ES with the Jahia content management system. As part of this new release, ES5 does support the CMIS API, which is a content management API that can be used to basically tie this more easily into systems like WordPress or Drupal or Jahia, so that you're not just keeping files in ES, but you have an easier route to publishing those to some other solutions. Now, this is a feature that's existed for a while, but I think they enhanced it a little more in ES5. The ES5 does have enhanced support for login screen customization. There's always been, it's kind of been hidden away here in the ES setup. There's an area where you can define a custom login file path. And basically, you put in there a CSS file and have that override certain elements on the login page. So you can have something that looks like this or like this, a little different from the default ES login page. In ES5, it's possible there's a way you can put I think you put different CSS files in a folder and then specify the folder as the path here. And you can have different URLs that lead into ES that have different themes. So if you're using the same ES system for different markets or different purposes, you might want different login screens that reflect different aspects of the product or different aspects of your brand. You could use this ability to completely overhaul the login screen for those different markets and have them be completely separate. However, the big news during Duo was that there's going to be an upcoming ES release sometime, I think, next winter. There's going to be 2 betas. The first is sometime this summer, and there's going to be a second beta later this year with, I think, a release either in late 2017 or early 2018. This release is going to feature numerous enhancements such as support for multiple sites, delegation and planning functionality, completely redesigned workflow and layout editors, customized user-created component plugins, and machine learning to automate tagging and search. So if you've used, as ES stands today, there is the ability you can either run a single server ES installation, or you can run a distributed installation, which allows you to break off certain tasks onto dedicated servers. So for example, you can have, rather than just having everything happen on one server, you can dedicate a server to, for example, rendering images and showing them in Dialog. You can dedicate a server to running files through eTwist. However, you're still kind of tethered to one sort of location for all this data. This upcoming release will include support for instances of ES that are spread across multiple sites. And what this will allow you to do is host either devices such as eTwist and renders or volumes in different physical locations. This would allow you to store the data locally so you don't have to consume as much network traffic. It would also allow you to optimize the performance of the system by controlling what work is stored in what location. So one example in this graphic here would be you might have an ES server where you've got your main application server somewhere in Europe. However, maybe over in North America, they want to add their own file system and maybe a render server. So those files would be stored locally. So it'd be easier for the local prepress maybe to get to those files. And they'd also have their own local Dialog server doing the rastering right there directly. How this would be set up in ES, there's a new category in the administrative area called sites, where you can create different sites. Then once you create a site, you can link it to a device. When you add maybe a new eTwist server, you link that device with a plant or with a site. From there, you can link a customer to one or more different sites, and you can assign a project to a specific site. So maybe you've got a customer prints at 2 different facilities, and they've got their own eTwist servers. You could have it configured so that that customer has both those plants linked to their customer account in ES. Then if you know a specific magazine or issue that they're producing is going to be printing in Chicago, you can link and assign that project to the specific Chicago plant, so it's run through the Chicago servers and processed more locally to the printing plant. Now in ES currently, there are a lot of functions you can use to keep track of the progress of a project overall. There are the project list, where you can assign which users are able to see a project. There are milestones which you can use to track certain points in a project. There are deadlines you can use to set basically when something needs to be due. But all these things currently, they're stored on different screens. So it takes a lot of different clicks to get in and get them set up. There's a lot of different moving parts. So one of the major changes ES has made, that Dalim has made to this upcoming release, is a centralized planning view that allows you to see your projects, your tasks, and your users all from one more global interface, or one more big picture interface. You can see an example screenshot of this down here, where it shows kind of like a Gantt chart view if you've done any project management, and also kind of a just task list down here for different projects. And how this is really going to work is it's based around some of the existing functionality in ES. This isn't all straight up new development. So this is under the hood actually setting the project list of who's assigned to a project. It's setting up the milestones, it's setting up the deadlines, but it just gives you a more unified interface to do it in. They did add for this a few new things, though. The first of which is there's a new thing in this paradigm called a task. A task is sort of like a milestone, except instead of a milestone where you have one fixed moment or deadline, a task is something that needs to be done, but needs to be done, it has a certain duration. It's going to take a certain amount of time to complete. And you can take either those milestones or those tasks and assign resources to them. And a resource would really be either a user or a group. You can assign them to either those tasks or milestones. There's views where you can basically see what someone's load is. There's a way you can configure. I think there's a calendar you can set up basically so that you can define when certain people are working and know how much work capacity they have. And then so that way when you're looking through and trying to assign certain tasks, you can see who's maybe fully just busy and who might have a little time to spare to work on something. And you have a little ability down here to see kind of how graphically how their work schedules go in too. There's the calendars I was mentioning. You can see basically you can define either a calendar globally that says what are working days. You can set separate calendars for example, for night shift or maybe weekend crew, so you know who's working when. And now this sort of thing is really going to take ES from just being a business workflow tool for processing or managing files, but also into a project management tool, more into a project management sphere where you can control resources and employees and manage projects much more centrally. One hotly requested feature is this upcoming release will also include delegation support. If I go on vacation or I get sick, I'll be able to temporarily redirect my approvals and my notifications to another user. This option can be set in either the user preferences or at the customer or an org level if I'm an administrator. So if I'm going to go on vacation, I can go in here, I can enable delegation, and I can set who my delegate is and say, okay, I want Bob to do my work this week while I'm gone. There is actually the ability to differentiate those delegates based on user role as well. So if I'm in a situation where maybe you got someone who's doing a lot, they bit off a lot of work, and I want to delegate their work, but I don't want to hand it off all to just one person, I can say I want to send all their production manager work or all the approvals with the production manager user role to this person. And I want to delegate all the operator tasks to this other person. Now, as part of this release, the ES workflow editor is going to see a complete overhaul. There is a brand new UI that's focused around a much simpler kind of scheme here. Basically, it's broken down into, hopefully you can see it pretty well on the slide. It's a bit of a small screenshot, but you've got the menu bar up here with pull-down menus. You've got a toolbar here, which is sort of like what we have in Twist today, where there's different categories of tools. The tool icons show up down here, and you can click and drag those into your canvas. In order to replace the view that used to come up when you double-clicked on a tool to set the properties, there is a right-hand info panel, which will show you all the info on where this goes on error. You can have the ability to set up comments, so you can make a note of what that specific tool does in the workflow. Now, this does have a few new features, such as copy and paste is now supported. So you can select a few tools if you want to duplicate them, copy and paste them. I think, but I'm not 100% sure that you can do that between workflows. I think you can copy from one workflow to another if you want to move tools between them. There is support for undo and redo. So if you delete something you didn't mean to, you can just go to edit undo, and you don't have to exit out of the workflow and hope you didn't save. You do have the ability to zoom the canvas, so you can zoom in or out and see those tools at whatever size you want, so you're not just viewing it as fixed size. There is now, too, a conditional link ability in here, which kind of mimics the setPrem from RE ability we used to have in Twist, if you're familiar with that. And this allows me to define conditions based off of metadata that define whether or not I follow a certain link in the workflow. So you can set it up and say, I only want to follow this link if the Canon model is equal to Nikon and the photo was created before this date. you can kind of see in the screenshot here, you can nest them a little too. So I could say I need the camera model to be this date. I need the camera model to be this. I need the date created to be before this, and I need one of these two other conditions to be true, but not necessarily both. So what this is really going to help for is reducing the reliance on custom Java code to do those comparisons like we do today. There will also be collapsible tool groups you can use to clean up the workflows visually. They're kind of like this little colored rectangle here. You can basically take and drag different tools into this tool group. So maybe you've got a particularly complex approval cycle that you don't want always taking up that screen real estate. It's working, you don't need to see it. You can drag it into a tool group like this, and then click the minus sign here to collapse it into this folder-like icon. Those tools are still in the workflow, they're being run through, but they're not taking up all that space until I expand it again. So you can use those to group different parts of your workflow by the function they perform, so that it's a little more visually regimented by function. Likewise, the job ticket layout editor is getting a significant overhaul as well. The new redesign for this is going to be very much WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. You will once again have copy and paste, undo and redo. It's also going to be responsive, so you don't have to set up rows and columns ahead of time like you did in the current versions of ES. So it'll be a little more responsive there. Now, with the release of desktops in ES5, Dalim created a new class of item within ES that's called a component. And a component was basically something in the scheme of desktops that you could drag in, like a Smart View box or a logout button. They were little items that performed a certain task or showed certain data. Now, since the release of ES5, Dalim has been moving more and more of the previous widgets that used to be in ES over to this component format. And really what the ultimate goal of this is going to be in this upcoming release. You'll be able to create custom widgets and displays, create your own custom components that allow you to see metadata and basically control how it's shown in either a job ticket layout, a smart view, or a desktop. These widgets will be coded in JavaScript and built around the ES API and existing metadata on the ES system. They're built really, they require three components. The first is there's core JavaScript, which actually defines the component. So it has a few basic things, like it describes what the component looks like, how it visualizes, what it does when it refreshes, if it needs to be updated, maybe a workflow, change some metadata behind the scenes. And then lastly, what it needs to do to perform an update when something changes in that view. The next part would be there's a plugin description, which is just a simple file which tells ES how this component is set up. And then lastly, there is some localization files that if you're using this in a global environment, you might want translations for French or German. So you can use the plugin in multiple markets. So examples of some of these plugins, there's one here where maybe you just need to collect a number from 0 to 300, and you don't want the user to just have a text box they type it in. You could have something like this where you have a slider which allows you to click and drag and set that metadata by changing a slider. But you don't always have to have something that can be user changeable. There's another example here that shows basically a progress bar of sorts, that same 0 to 300 scale. But when they showed the demo, this actually, whenever the metadata changed in the workflow, it would move this up and show you the progress meter of sorts and complete this circle. So it doesn't have to be something the user can always set, but it's ways that you can create and show or edit possibly data in a job ticket layout, smart view, or desktop. So a few more advanced examples of those here. So the first one here is basically they had a job in Dialog that had a bunch of annotations that were done in German. They had this plugin configured here that you can select a language and it would go out to some web API and translate from whatever language it was originally in to another specified language. So in this case, the original comments were in German. They were being translated to English by an online service, all within a job ticket layout window in ES. One other example here too was they built a simple SQL client in a job ticket layout. So what this does here is they were querying an external SQL database and running a query and getting the results within ES. So this is something that you could build off of to really incorporate other systems into ES or change how the information you have in ES is displayed so it more fits your needs. And lastly, it's unfortunate I didn't have any screenshots of this to show you. It was mostly a live demo they did at Duo, but they've been working on, Jacques has been working on incorporating machine learning and deep learning engine into ES to help with searching and tagging images. This would basically be a sort of artificial intelligence. And the two uses they demonstrated were automatic image tagging and captioning and image searching. How these really shake down, automatic image tagging, it was able to look at images and identify what was probably in that image and add tags and keywords in the metadata. Right now, if you're uploading a large amount of data, you have to go through and have someone manually add those keywords into files. This would at least be something you could guess and do a first round tagging that could be later cleaned up by an operator as necessary. But that would reduce the manual labor needed in that step. Secondly, there's the ability to search for similar images. They showed one example where you might have an image with a tree in it. You want to find other images that look like they have trees in them. This could break apart the image, figure out roughly what's in it, and try and find images that are constructed similarly. There was one other example they did of that too, where they had a portion of this machine learning configured to detect the color palette of a file and say, okay, these colors are in the file. And you could search based off that and find other images with a similar color palette. The use of that might be maybe you're in a situation where you have a customer's logo and you want to search through some stock images for a presentation to find one that has a similar color scheme so that they match nicely. So that's about the gist of the presentation. Any questions?
A couple questions here, Alex. First one, you mentioned a couple release dates for updates. And the question is, are those releases broken down in terms of what comes when? Specifically, the project management piece that you showed.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything specifically on what's broken down, so that's something I would have to check with Dalim on. But my thought is I think a lot of that's going to be, it's more a cycle of first round and then any fixes that need to be made. So I would have to check in with Dalim on that.
Second one. Now, I'm not sure why anybody would admit this, but I'm still on Twist 7. Is it considered to be a major upgrade to go to Twist 8?
Well, Twist 8, it's a version level increase, but there's not a lot that's changed in the mechanics of Twist 8 as far as we've seen so far. There are new settings in the tools, but it's not as drastic of a change as jumping from Twist 5 to 6 or 6 to 7. So for the customers we've seen who've migrated, we really haven't seen too much of a need to go through and replace some of the input files and PS check tools like we did jumping from 6 to 7. So major version increase in the number, but you might not need to tweak as much on your specific system when performing that upgrade.
That's it. Not a lot of questioners this morning.
Well, thank you all for attending and have a good day.